The February storm had battered the English coast for 3 days when the harbour master of the small fishing village of Thornwick arrived at Baker Street, drenched and desperate, clutching a leather-bound journal filled with strange nautical observations and a telegram reporting the mysterious disappearance of the local lighthouse keeper, bringing with him a mystery that would prove to be one of the most atmospheric and dangerously isolated cases Sherlock Holmes ever investigated. Holmes, who had been researching coastal geography and maritime navigation systems as part of his studies into smuggling operations, work that would prove remarkably relevant to our investigation, looked up with sharp interest as our wind-beaten visitor entered, leaving puddles of seawater on Mrs. Hudson's carpet. Captain William Morse was perhaps 55 years old, weathered by decades at sea, his face deeply lined with worry as he placed the journal and telegram on Holmes's desk with hands that trembled from cold and anxiety. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he began urgently. "I've come from Thornwick on the Cornwall coast, where our lighthouse keeper, a man named Jeremiah Blackstone, has vanished under circumstances that defy all rational explanation. The lighthouse stands on an isolated rock outcrop accessible only by boat during calm seas, and for the past 3 days, the storm has made approach impossible. But we can see from the village that the light continues to operate normally, rotating on schedule, visible through the storm exactly as it should be. Yet when the storm briefly abated yesterday, a supply boat managed to reach the lighthouse and found it completely abandoned. No sign of Blackstone, no indication of where he went or how he could have left the island during the storm. The lighthouse operates itself, the mechanisms running perfectly, but the keeper has vanished as if into the sea itself. Before I continue with this most mysterious case, please subscribe to Detective Sherlock if you haven't already. Your support helps us bring these mysteries to life. Like this video, hit the notification bell, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let us proceed with the haunting mystery of the lighthouse keeper's secret. Holmes leaned forward with immediate interest, his eyes bright with the particular intensity he showed when confronted with seemingly impossible disappearances. "Captain Morse, you say the lighthouse continues operating normally despite the keeper's absence. Are these mechanisms automated, or do they require human intervention?" "That's what makes this so impossible, Mr. Holmes," Morse replied, his voice rough with confusion. "The lighthouse has some automation. The lens rotation is driven by clockwork weights that descend slowly, like a grandfather clock. But those weights must be wound every 8 hours, or the rotation stops. For the light to have operated continuously for 3 days since we last confirmed Blackstone was there, someone must have been winding those weights on schedule, yet the lighthouse is empty. No keeper, no assistant, no one at all. Just the mechanisms running themselves, as if operated by a ghost." "Describe Jeremiah Blackstone," Holmes requested. "How long had he served as keeper? What was his character? Did he have any known difficulties or enemies?" "Blackstone had been lighthouse keeper for 23 years, Morse said. He took the position after retiring from the Merchant Navy, where he'd served as a navigator. He was solitary by nature. Lighthouse keeping suited him because it required living in isolation, with minimal human contact. He would come to the village once a month for supplies, exchange a few words with myself or the shopkeepers, then return to his lighthouse island. He spoke little about his past or his thoughts, kept largely to himself. but seemed content with his isolated life. Did he have family? Close associates? I asked. No family that we knew of. He'd never married, had no children, rarely received correspondence. He was essentially alone in the world, except for his lighthouse and the sea. But he performed his duties impeccably. The light never failed. The mechanisms were maintained perfectly, and he kept detailed logs of weather conditions, passing ships, and anything unusual he observed from his vantage point on the rock. Holmes picked up the leather-bound journal Morse had brought. This is one of his logbooks, his most recent journal, covering the past 6 months, Morse confirmed. I retrieved it from the lighthouse when we discovered his disappearance. The entries are strange, Mr. Holmes. Starting about 3 months ago, Blackstone began recording observations that seem increasingly disturbed, or perhaps frightened. References to lights where no lights should be, to boats approaching the island at night without showing navigation lamps, to sounds he heard over the wind that he described as voices from the deep or the old tongue speaking. His final entries, written in the days before his disappearance, are particularly unsettling. Holmes opened the journal and read several passages aloud. January 15th. The light appeared again tonight, approximately 2 miles northeast, visible intermittently through the fog. Not a ship's lantern, too steady, too bright. It remained stationary for nearly an hour, then vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. I signaled with my own light, but received no response. What vessel anchors in that location in such dangerous waters? January 23rd. I heard them again tonight. The voices carried on the wind. Not English, not any language I recognize from my years at sea. The old tongue, as my grandfather called it, when he told stories of the ancient people who lived on this coast before the Romans came. Superstitious nonsense. Yet I hear it clearly. Am I losing my reason in this isolation? February 2nd. They came to the island last night. I heard the boat's hull scraping against the rocks below. Heard footsteps on the stairs to the lighthouse entrance. But when I went to investigate, I found no one. No boat at the landing, no signs of visitors. Yet I know what I heard. Someone or something approaches in the darkness, and I am beginning to fear what they want. February 7th. I see them now in daylight. Shadows moving among the rocks when I scan the island through my telescope. Figures that vanish when I try to focus on them directly. I am not mad, yet what I observe cannot be real. If this continues, I will have to request relief, admit that isolation has affected my mind. But I believe there is something here, some presence on this rock that I have not noticed in 23 years until now. February 10th. Tonight I will keep watch. If they come again, I will confront them, demand answers. I can no longer live in this state of uncertainty, seeing and hearing things that may or may not exist. The lighthouse operates itself well enough for one night without my attention to the mechanisms. I must know the truth, whatever the cost. Holmes set down the journal, his expression thoughtful. The entry for February 10th is the last. Yes, Morse confirmed. The storm began on the night of February 11th, and we haven't been able to reach the island since then, until yesterday's brief calm allowed a supply boat through. We found the lighthouse empty, the mechanisms running, and this journal on Blackstone's desk, open to that final entry. No other notes, no signs of struggle or violence, no indication of where Blackstone went or what happened to him. And you're certain no boat could have left the island during the storm? Holmes pressed. Absolutely certain. The seas have been too violent for any small craft to survive. Even our largest fishing boats remained in harbour. Attempting to venture out would have been suicide. If Blackstone left the island after the storm began, he had no means of doing so. And if he left before the storm, how has the lighthouse continued operating for 3 days without him there to wind the mechanisms? Holmes stood decisively. Watson, pack for several days in harsh coastal conditions. Captain Morse will accompany you back to Thornwick immediately. This case requires on-site investigation of the lighthouse itself, examination of the island, and interviews with villagers who may have information about Blackstone's behaviour before his disappearance. The journal entries suggest either genuine mystery involving unknown visitors to the island, or psychological deterioration causing hallucinations and paranoia. Either way, the answer lies at the lighthouse. We departed for Cornwall that afternoon, travelling by train through increasingly wild countryside until we reached the small coastal village of Thornwick. The village consisted of perhaps 200 souls, fishing families who had lived on this harsh coast for generations, their lives dictated by the sea's moods and the weather's mercy. The harbour was small but serviceable, protected by a stone breakwater, with fishing boats tied up and waiting for the storm's end. Captain Morse pointed out to sea, where perhaps a mile from shore, a dark rock outcrop rose from the waves like a jagged tooth. Atop the rock stood the lighthouse, a stone tower perhaps 80 feet tall, painted white with a black horizontal band. Its lantern room at the summit housing the massive lens that warned ships away from the treacherous coastal rocks. That's Thornwick Light, Morse said. The island it stands on is perhaps 300 feet across, mostly bare rock with some vegetation in sheltered spots. The lighthouse keeper's quarters are in the base of the tower, 3 rooms on the ground level, with the light mechanism and lens occupying the upper floors. A supply boat visits monthly, weather permitting, bringing food, fuel oil for the lamp, and any necessities the keeper requests. How does one access the island? Holmes asked, studying the distant lighthouse through a telescope. There's a landing on the lee side, a small stone quay where boats can tie up in calm conditions. From there, stone steps lead up the rock face to the lighthouse entrance. In rough weather, landing is impossible because waves break completely over the island. During winter storms, the lighthouse itself is often struck by waves, though it's built solidly enough to withstand such impacts. The storm is diminishing, Holmes observed, studying the sky and sea conditions. Tomorrow morning, if conditions continue improving, we'll visit the lighthouse. Tonight, I want to interview villagers who knew Blackstone, learn what they observed about his behaviour in recent weeks, and determine if anyone else has seen these mysterious lights or boats he described in his journal. We took rooms at the village's single inn, a weathered building overlooking the harbour. That evening, Holmes conducted interviews with various villagers who had encountered Blackstone during his monthly visits to the village. The shopkeeper who supplied Blackstone's provisions remembered the lighthouse keeper as quiet and methodical, always ordering the same items, paying promptly, exchanging minimal conversation. But these past few months, he seemed different, the shopkeeper recalled. More agitated, looking over his shoulder as if expecting someone to be following him. Last time he came must have been early February, just before the storm. He asked me if I'd heard stories about the old smugglers who used to operate along this coast. Said he thought there might be modern smugglers using the coves near the Lighthouse Island. I told him smuggling hadn't been serious in these parts for 50 years or more, but he seemed convinced he'd observed something suspicious. A retired fisherman named Tom Garrett provided more intriguing information. "I've fished these waters for 60 years, Garrett said, his weathered face thoughtful. "And I've seen things I can't easily explain. Lights in places where no ships should be. Boats moving without showing proper navigation lamps. Catches of fish in my nets that seem to have been placed there rather than caught naturally. As if someone's using my nets for storing or transporting something illegal." I mentioned this to Blackstone once, a few months back when I saw him in the village. He got very interested, asked me specific questions about timing and locations. Said he'd been observing similar strangeness from the lighthouse. "Did you believe there was actual smuggling occurring?" Holmes asked. "I don't know what to believe," Garrett replied honestly. "Could be smuggling. There's always demand for contraband goods, and these coastal caves provide good hiding places. Could be something else entirely. The sea keeps secrets, Mr. Holmes. And sometimes those of us who make our living on the water see things we can't explain and learn not to ask too many questions." Holmes also interviewed the doctor who had occasionally treated Blackstone for minor ailments over the years. Dr. Pemberton was a young physician recently established in Thornwick who had seen Blackstone only twice. Both visits were within the past 3 months, the doctor reported. First time he complained of insomnia and anxiety, said he was having difficulty sleeping because of strange noises he heard at night. I prescribed a mild sedative and suggested that isolation might be affecting his mental state, that perhaps he should consider requesting an assistant keeper or taking more frequent leave to visit civilization. He rejected the suggestion, said he preferred isolation and just needed help sleeping. "And the second visit?" I prompted. "About a month ago, he came in with symptoms of acute stress, elevated pulse, tremors, expressed fears that he was being watched or followed. I examined him thoroughly and found no physical illness, but his psychological state was clearly deteriorated. I strongly recommended he request relief from his duties, take an extended leave, possibly consult a specialist in nervous disorders. He refused, insisted that he couldn't abandon his post, that he had to see something through to its conclusion. Those were his words, see something through to its conclusion. I got the impression he felt obligated to continue observing or investigating something, even though doing so was causing him significant distress. Did he describe what he was investigating or observing? Holmes asked sharply. No, he was evasive when I pressed for details. Said only that there were things happening near the lighthouse that someone needed to document. That he had responsibilities beyond just maintaining the light. I interpreted this as possible paranoid delusions. The isolated keeper developing obsessive beliefs about threats or mysteries that existed only in his imagination. But now, with his disappearance, I wonder if he was actually observing something real and dangerous. The next morning dawned clearer, with diminished winds and calmer seas. Captain Morse deemed conditions safe enough for the trip to the lighthouse. We set out in a sturdy fishing boat, along with Morse himself, 2 experienced sailors, and basic equipment for investigating the lighthouse and island. The approach to Thornwick Light was dramatic. The rock outcrop rose steeply from the sea, its dark stone worn smooth by centuries of waves, streaked with white from bird droppings and salt deposits. The lighthouse tower stood stark against the sky, its white walls bright in the morning sun, its black band marking the structure's midpoint. As we neared, I could see the lantern room at the summit, its multi-prismed lens visible through the windows, and I felt a chill imagining the isolation of living in such a place, surrounded by nothing but rock and sea, but the nearest human contact a mile across dangerous waters. We tied up at the small stone quay on the lee side of the island. The structure was slick with spray and green algae, requiring careful footing. Stone steps carved into the rock face led upward to the lighthouse entrance, perhaps 50 feet above sea level. Holmes examined everything carefully as we climbed. The condition of the steps, signs of recent use, any evidence that boats other than official supply vessels had landed at the quay. The lighthouse entrance was a heavy wooden door painted red, secured with a simple lock. Captain Morse produced a key, one of 2 copies, the other having been in Blackstone's possession. The door swung open to reveal the keeper's quarters. The ground floor was divided into 3 rooms, a combined kitchen and sitting area, a bedroom, and a storage room for fuel oil and supplies. All were neat and well maintained, showing the orderliness of a man who had lived alone for decades and developed systematic habits. The kitchen showed signs of recent use, dishes washed and stacked, food supplies organized in a pantry, a pot on the stove that had held soup or stew, now cold and congealed. Holmes examined everything methodically. He studied the dishes, noting that only one setting had been used, confirming Blackstone had been alone at his last meal. He examined the food supplies, calculating that Blackstone had provisions for another 2 weeks. He checked the bedroom, finding the bed made military precise, clothing folded neatly in a trunk, personal items arranged with careful order. Everything suggests routine, normalcy, systematic habits maintained, Holmes observed. This is not a room abandoned in panic or during emergency. Blackstone left these quarters calmly, expecting to return. In the storage room, Holmes found something more interesting. A row of logbooks, similar to the one Captain Morse had brought to Baker Street, covering Blackstone's entire 23 years as lighthouse keeper. Holmes pulled several volumes from different years and flicked through them, comparing entries. For 22 years, the entries are purely functional, Holmes noted. Weather observations, ships sighted, maintenance performed on the lighthouse mechanisms, visits from supply boats, methodical, detailed, emotionless. But starting last September, 6 months ago, the tone changes. The entries become more personal, more troubled, recording observations that seem to disturb him. He read from one of the earlier troubled entries. September 3rd. I observed something unusual tonight that I cannot rationally explain. While scanning the sea with my telescope during routine watch, I saw what appeared to be a boat without lights approaching the small cove on the northeast side of the island. When I trained the lighthouse beam on that area, I saw nothing. No boat, no people, no disturbance of the water. Yet I am certain I saw a vessel approaching. Am I developing vision problems after too many years staring at the horizon? The troubled observations began 6 months ago, I said. What could have changed after 22 years of routine lighthouse keeping? That's what we must determine, Holmes replied. Either something genuinely changed, new activity in the area, actual smuggling operations or other illicit activity that Blackstone began noticing. Or something changed within Blackstone himself, causing him to perceive threats or mysteries where none existed. We climbed the spiral staircase that wound upward through the lighthouse tower. The stairs were iron, bolted solidly to the stone walls, rising through 3 levels. The keeper's quarters at ground level, a storage level with spare parts and maintenance equipment, and the lamp room at the summit where the massive Fresnel lens rotated on its clockwork mechanism. The lamp room was a marvel of engineering. The lens itself was enormous, perhaps 8 feet tall, composed of hundreds of precisely cut glass prisms arranged in concentric rings. Each ring designed to capture light from the central lamp and project it in a powerful beam visible for miles across the dark sea. The entire lens assembly rotated slowly on a bed of mercury, driven by clockwork weights that descended through the center of the lighthouse tower, exactly like a giant grandfather clock mechanism. Holmes examined the clockwork mechanism carefully. These weights were wound recently, within the past 8 hours, I'd estimate, based on how far they've descended. Someone has been maintaining the lighthouse operation since Blackwood disappeared. But we found no one here, Captain Morse protested. We searched every room, every space large enough to conceal a person. The lighthouse is empty. Then we're missing something, Holmes said firmly. The weights cannot wind themselves. Someone has been here, maintaining the mechanism, keeping the light operational. We need to search more thoroughly. Look for hidden spaces, concealed rooms, any area we might have overlooked. We descended and began a systematic search of the entire lighthouse. Holmes examined walls for hollow spaces, floors for trapdoors, stonework for hidden compartments. He measured dimensions of rooms against the outer walls, looking for discrepancies that might indicate concealed areas. He studied the spiral staircase, checking if any sections could hide storage or living spaces. In the fuel storage room, Holmes made a discovery. Behind a rack of fuel barrels, barely visible in the dim light, was a narrow door set flush with the stone wall. The door was locked from the outside with a simple bolt, suggesting it was meant to secure something inside, rather than keep intruders out. Holmes drew back the bolt and pulled the door open, revealing a small storage space carved into the rock, perhaps 6 feet square, with a low ceiling that required stooping. The space was empty except for some old equipment, rope, and spare parts. But on the floor, barely visible in the dust, were footprints, recent, made within the past few days. Someone has been using this space, Holmes said, examining the footprints. The prints are smaller than Blackstone's. He wore size 11 boots based on the pair we found in his bedroom. These are perhaps size 8 or 9. Someone else has been on this island, concealing themselves in this hidden storage space. But why? I asked. And where are they now? Holmes examined the storage space more carefully, noting details I had missed. On one wall were scratches in the stone, deliberate marks rather than random damage. The scratches formed letters. They know, must move before discovered. J.B. Blackstone's initials, Captain Morse confirmed. But what does it mean? They know. Who are they? And must move before discovered. Move what? Blackstone was hiding something or someone in this space, Holmes deduced, and he feared discovery by parties he referred to as they. The question is whether Blackstone was protecting something legitimate, perhaps a refugee or someone in danger, or whether he was involved in something illicit, smuggling, concealing stolen goods, harboring criminals. We continued our search of the island itself, examining the rocky terrain outside the lighthouse. The island was indeed small, perhaps 300 feet across at its widest point, mostly bare rock with patches of tough grass and shrubs in the few spots sheltered from constant wind and salt spray. There were several natural caves and crevices in the rock formation, carved by millennia of wave action. Holmes investigated each cave systematically. Most were shallow and empty, showing only the natural accumulation of seaweed, shells, and driftwood deposited by storms. But one cave on the northeast side of the island, the same area where Blackstone had reported seeing boats approaching without lights, contained something far more interesting. The cave entrance was partially submerged at high tide, but accessible at low tide, which currently prevailed. Holmes waded into the shallow water at the cave mouth and disappeared into the darkness. I followed with a lantern, finding myself in the cavern perhaps 20 feet deep, with the ceiling just high enough to stand upright. The cave had been used as storage. Wooden crates were stacked along the walls, covered with canvas tarps to protect them from moisture. Holmes pulled back a tarp and examined the nearest crate. It was marked with French text, indicating it contained cognac, expensive brandy that should have been imported through proper channels, with customs duties paid. Smuggled goods, Holmes confirmed, examining several more crates. Spirits, tobacco, fine textiles, all items subject to substantial import duties, all apparently brought into England illegally and stored here for later distribution. This explains Blackstone's journal entries about boats approaching at night without navigation lights. He was documenting smuggling operations. But was he part of the operation or observing it? I asked. That's the crucial question, Holmes replied. Was Blackstone a participant in smuggling who documented it for record-keeping purposes? Or was he an honest lighthouse keeper who discovered smuggling and began documenting it as evidence? His journal entries suggest the latter. He writes as if he's observing illegal activity, not participating in it. But we need more information to be certain. We searched the cave thoroughly and find additional evidence. Remnants of recent fires, showing that people had occupied the cave for extended periods. Discarded food containers and bottles. And most tellingly, a small notebook hidden beneath a rock. The notebook contained dates and numerical notations, apparently a ledger recording smuggling shipments, with dates of deliveries, quantities of goods, and what appeared to be distribution arrangements. Holmes studied the notebook intently. The entries covered the past 8 months. The first entry is dated last June, roughly when Blackstone's journal entries began noting unusual observations. The smuggling operation appears to be substantial and organized, with regular shipments arriving monthly and goods distributed to various locations along the coast. If Blackstone discovered this operation, why didn't he report it to authorities? Captain Morse asked. Perhaps he tried, Holmes suggested. Or perhaps he feared reprisal if he reported it before gathering sufficient evidence. Smugglers don't take kindly to witnesses or informants. If they discovered Blackstone was documenting their operation, they would have strong motive to eliminate him. Either kill him or force him to disappear in a way that wouldn't attract attention to their activities. We returned to the Lighthouse with our discoveries. Holmes continued examining Blackstone's journals, looking for specific references that might identify the smugglers or explain the keeper's disappearance. The most recent journal, he found entries that confirmed our theory. January 20th. I have documented sufficient evidence of the smuggling operation to present to authorities. The boats arrive on moonless nights, unload in the northeast cave, and depart before dawn. I have recorded dates, times, and descriptions of the vessels and the men involved. But I must be careful. They are dangerous men who would kill to protect their operation. I will wait until the next time I visit the village, then present my evidence to Captain Morse and request help from constables or customs agents. January 28th. They suspect I've been watching. Tonight, one of them came to the lighthouse, asked pointed questions about what I've observed, implied threats about what happens to those who interfere with private business. I denied knowledge of their activities, but I could tell he didn't believe me. I must accelerate my plans to report them. February 5th. I have hidden copies of my documentation in case anything happens to me. If I disappear or die under suspicious circumstances, someone must find the evidence and stop these criminals. I have concealed it where someone intelligent would think to look, but where the smugglers would never find it. He hid copies of his evidence, Holmes said with satisfaction. We must find what he concealed. He says it's hidden where someone intelligent would think to look, but where the smugglers would never find it. That's a clue. He's hidden it somewhere that requires knowledge or reasoning to discover, somewhere that wouldn't be found by simple searching. Holmes considered the problem, examining the lighthouse keeper's quarters again with this new perspective. Where would a methodical, systematic man like Blackstone hide important documents in a way that required intelligence to discover? Holmes's eyes fell on the row of logbooks, 23 years' worth of lighthouse keeping records, dozens of identical volumes arranged chronologically on a shelf. Watson, if you wanted to hide specific pages of documentation among hundreds of similar pages, where would you put them? among the other logbooks, I realized. Hidden in plain sight, indistinguishable from the legitimate entries unless someone knew to look for them specifically. Holmes began pulling logbooks from the shelf, examining them quickly. Most contained the expected routine entries. But one volume, the logbook for 1872, midway through Blackstone's tenure, had pages inserted that didn't match the handwriting or dates of the surrounding entries. These inserted pages contained detailed documentation of the smuggling operation, dates of shipments, descriptions of boats and crew members, lists of goods smuggled, sketches of the men involved, and notations about where the contraband was distributed. It was comprehensive evidence, exactly what customs agents would need to shut down the operation and arrest those involved. "This is what Blackstone died for," Holmes said grimly, studying the documentation. He spent months carefully observing and recording the smuggling operation, compiling evidence that would destroy it. The smugglers discovered his investigation and had to eliminate him before he could present this evidence to authorities. "But how did they eliminate him?" Captain Morse asked. "And why is the lighthouse still operating?" "Because they needed it to continue operating," Holmes explained. "If the lighthouse went dark, it would immediately attract attention. Investigation by harbour authorities, possibly involvement of constables or customs agents. The smugglers couldn't risk that attention, not with their contraband stored in the cave. So they had to make Blackstone disappear in a way that wouldn't cause the lighthouse to fail. At least, not immediately." "You think they forced him to show them how to operate the lighthouse before they killed him?" I suggested. "Possibly. Or they had someone with sufficient maritime knowledge to figure it out themselves. The clockwork mechanism is complex, but not incomprehensible. Anyone with mechanical aptitude could learn to wind the weights and maintain the light. My theory is that the smugglers confronted Blackstone, realized he'd been documenting their operation, and forced him to reveal where he'd hidden his evidence. When he refused, or claimed to have already sent it to authorities, they killed him and disposed of his body at sea. Then, one of their number remained on the island, hiding in that concealed storage space, emerging periodically to wind the clockwork and maintain the light until they could complete their next shipment and evacuate the contraband from the cave. So the person who's been operating the lighthouse is one of the smugglers, Captain Morse said. But where are they now? We searched the entire island and found no one. Because they saw our boat approaching and hid somewhere we haven't yet discovered, Holmes replied. Or they've already fled, perhaps just before we arrived this morning. But they were here within the past 8 hours. Those clockwork weights were wound recently. Holmes examined the lighthouse grounds again, this time specifically looking for a hiding place that would conceal someone from our search. He studied the rock face surrounding the lighthouse, the outbuildings, any structure that might offer concealment. Then he looked upward, toward the lighthouse gallery, the narrow exterior walkway that encircled the lantern room at the tower's summit. The gallery was protected by an iron railing, but was otherwise exposed to the elements. It seemed an unlikely hiding place, but Holmes had learned never to dismiss possibilities without investigation. We climbed back up the spiral staircase to the lamp room and stepped out onto the gallery. The wind struck immediately, a constant gale that made standing difficult and speech nearly impossible. The gallery was perhaps 3 feet wide, encircling the lantern room, with the iron railing preventing falls to the rocks 80 feet below. Holmes made his way around the gallery, searching methodically. On the seaward side, where the gallery was least visible from below and most difficult to access, he found what he sought: a rope tied to the railing, hanging down the exterior wall of the lighthouse. Someone used this rope to descend the tower, Holmes shouted over the wind. They were hiding on the gallery when we arrived, waited until we were inside searching the keeper's quarters, then used this rope to climb down the exterior wall and escape to the island's far side. We descended quickly and made our way to the seaward side of the island. There, among the rocks, we found recent footprints in the patches of dirt and sand between the stones. The prints led to the northeast cave, the same cave where the smuggled goods were stored. Holmes approached the cave cautiously, signaling for the rest of us to spread out and block potential escape routes. We entered the cave carefully, lanterns raised, and found it apparently empty. The smuggled goods still stacked along the walls, but no human presence visible. Then Holmes noticed that one stack of crates had been moved slightly, revealing a gap in the rock wall behind them. He pulled more crates aside, exposing a narrow crevice that led deeper into the island's rock formation. A natural tunnel carved by ancient water flow, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "They fled into the island's interior," Holmes said. "Captain Morse, send one of your men back to the village immediately. We need constables and customs agents here as quickly as possible. The rest of us will pursue the fugitive through this tunnel, but we must be careful. They're trapped and desperate, which makes them dangerous." One of the sailors departed in the boat while Holmes, myself, Captain Morse, and the remaining sailor prepared to enter the tunnel. We equipped ourselves with lanterns, rope, a pistol I had brought from Baker Street. Then we squeezed into the narrow crevice and began our pursuit. The tunnel was claustrophobic and disorienting, twisting through the rock formation with numerous branches and dead ends. Water dripped from the ceiling, and the sound of waves echoed through the passages, making it difficult to determine direction or distance. We moved slowly, Holmes leading with a lantern raised, examining the wet rock for signs of recent passage. After perhaps 20 minutes of careful navigation, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, a natural cave perhaps 15 feet across, with a hole in the ceiling allowing dim daylight to filter through. In the center of the chamber, pressed against the far wall, was a man. He was perhaps 35 years old, rough in appearance, wearing the clothes of a sailor or dock worker, his face weathered by sun and sea. In his hand was a knife, a long-bladed weapon held defensively as he watched our approach. "Stay back!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the cave. "I'll not hang for Blackstone's death, and I'll fight anyone who tries to take me." "Put down the knife," Holmes said calmly. "You're trapped, surrounded, and have nowhere to run. Surrender peacefully, and you'll face justice through proper legal channels. Resist, and the outcome will be far worse for you." "Justice?" The man laughed bitterly. "There's no justice for men like me. We're just trying to earn a living in hard times, avoiding government taxes that steal from honest workers. Blackstone should have minded his own business, should have let us conduct our trade in peace. But he had to play the righteous keeper, document everything, threaten to report us to authorities, He forced our hand. "So you admit to killing him?" Holmes said. "I admit to defending our operation against a threat," the man replied. Blackstone wouldn't listen to reason, wouldn't accept payment to look the other way, wouldn't stop his spying and recording. When we confronted him, told him to hand over his evidence and keep silent, he refused. Said he had a duty to report criminal activity, that he wouldn't be complicit in smuggling. So we did what was necessary, held him until he told us where he'd hidden his documentation, then disposed of him where he'd never be found. "Where is his body?" I asked, horrified by the casual admission of murder. "In the sea," the man said coldly, "weighted with stones and dropped in deep water during the storm. The currents will carry him far from here, and fish will ensure nothing remains to identify. Blackstone is gone, and there's no evidence to prove his death was anything but accidental drowning. A lighthouse keeper who fell from the rocks during a storm. A tragedy, but not a crime." "Except you're here to provide evidence," Holmes pointed out. "And Blackstone was clever enough to hide documentation you didn't find, despite your efforts to force him to reveal its location. We have his evidence, we have the smuggled goods, and now we have your confession, witnessed by multiple people. Your operation is finished, and you will face justice for Blackstone's murder." The man's expression shifted from defiance to desperation. He glanced at the knife in his hand, then at the cave opening above, perhaps calculating chances of escape or considering whether to fight despite overwhelming odds against him. "Don't be a fool," Captain Morse said firmly. "You're already facing smuggling charges and likely murder. Don't add assaulting officers or additional violence to your crimes. Surrender the knife and come peacefully." The tension in the cave was palpable, the trapped smuggler clearly weighing his options. Then, slowly, his shoulders sagged in defeat. He dropped the knife to the cave floor and raised his hands in surrender.